A 4-year-old homeless girl finds a millionaire about to be sawed in half, but she appears behind and does something that shocks everyone. Comment giving a score from 0 to 10 to my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The scorching afternoon sun beat down on the cracked asphalt of the rural highway, creating heat waves that distorted the arid landscape. Amidst the parched scrub and oppressive silence, a tiny figure shuffled along the roadside. The 4-year-old girl looked half her age due to the extreme malnourishment that marked every inch of her fragile body. Her arms, thin as dried twigs, trembled with each step, while her bare, wounded feet left small smudges of blood on the hot ground. Her large, deep-set eyes reflected a disturbing maturity, as if they had witnessed horrors no child should know. The dirty, tattered dress hung loosely on her skeletal frame, and her tangled hair clung to a face slick with sweat from exhaustion and dehydration. For 3 days, she had wandered aimlessly, surviving only on dirty water from puddles and scraps of food found in abandoned trash cans. The roar of a powerful engine shattered the deadly silence of the road. A luxurious black car appeared on the horizon, kicking up a cloud of golden dust. The girl instinctively hid behind a large rock, her heart pounding with the primal fear she had learned to feel whenever adults approached. Her small hands clutched tightly a sharp stone she had collected hours before, not as a toy, but as her only protection in a world that offered her only danger. The vehicle stopped abruptly about 100 yards ahead, its doors flying open violently. 3 men emerged quickly, their tense and aggressive movements slicing through the heavy afternoon air. The girl watched, paralyzed, as 2 of them dragged a tall, elegant figure from the back seat. It was a man of approximately 30 years, with the appearance of a movie star. Dark hair, perfectly styled even amidst the chaos, a strong jawline, and an athletic build that showed through the expensive suit, now rumpled and stained. His hands were tied behind his back with thick ropes that had already cut into his wrists, leaving red marks on his tanned skin. A piece of cloth served as a gag, muffling his groans of pain. Even in such a desperate situation, there was something magnetic about his presence, the kind of man who commanded boardrooms and amassed fortunes through smart investments on Wall Street. His blue eyes, now filled with terror, desperately searched for an impossible escape. The tallest of the kidnappers, a burly guy with scars on his face and tattoos on his muscular arms, held a rusty iron bar with disturbing familiarity. His rough voice echoed through the desolate landscape like the bark of a wild animal. "Where's the money, you son of a bitch? We know you've got millions stashed in Bitcoin and offshore accounts. My family lost everything because of you, and now you're going to pay back every goddamn cent." The millionaire tried to speak through the gag, his eyes conveying increasing despair. Sweat dripped down his flawless face, mingling with tears of panic he struggled to contain. It was obvious he had been caught off guard, probably leaving some business meeting or social event, never imagining that his success and dollar fortune had made him a target of revenge. The lead kidnapper raised the iron bar, his muscles tensing with the promise of imminent violence. "I'm going to start by breaking your fingers one by one, until you tell me where you keep your secret funds and holdings. Then we move on to the bigger bones." The girl watched the scene with a strange mix of terror and recognition. She had witnessed violence before. In the streets where she had lived, brutality was a daily routine. But something about that elegant and desperate man awakened a protective instinct she didn't even know she possessed. Maybe it was the way he looked around, searching for salvation, or the way his tears seemed too genuine for someone accustomed to causing suffering. Without thinking, driven by an impulse that defied her own experience of self-preservation, the girl tightened her grip on the sharp stone in her small skeletal hand. Her lungs burned, her legs trembled with weakness, but something stronger than fear propelled her forward. She emerged from her hiding place like a ghostly shadow, her bare feet making the faintest noise on the hot asphalt. The kidnapper was so focused on his victim that he didn't notice the child's presence until it was too late. The stone struck the base of his skull with surprising force for someone so frail, and he collapsed like a felled giant, unconscious before he even hit the ground. The other two men stood paralyzed for a few crucial seconds, unable to process that they had been neutralized by a child who looked more like a starving ghost than a real threat. That moment of shock was enough for the millionaire, even tied up, to manage to stand up and run towards the car, shouting for help through the gag. The ensuing confusion allowed both him and the girl to escape, leaving the kidnappers disoriented and in total panic. The luxury car flew down the dusty road, its tires skidding on the curves as the millionaire drove with his hands still trembling from the recent terror. In the passenger seat, the girl was huddled like a wounded animal, her large eyes fixed on the man she had just saved. The silence inside the vehicle was broken only by the sound of the powerful engine and the heavy breathing of both, still processing what had happened. He glanced in the rearview mirror once more, checking to see if they were being followed. His elegant hands, accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar contracts and commanding financial empires, trembled visibly on the Italian leather steering wheel. The designer suit was rumpled and dirty, an incongruous mark on someone whose impeccable appearance was his trademark in the most exclusive business circles. How could such a small child have the courage to do that? He murmured to himself, casting quick glances at his passenger. The girl seemed even smaller inside the spacious car, as if she could disappear between the cream-colored leather seats. Her wounded feet barely touched the floor, and she held onto the door tightly, as if she were ready to flee at any moment. The businessman gradually slowed down, realizing he was driving like a madman. He needed to calm down, think clearly. His fortune had been built on calculated decisions and cold risk analyses, not on emotional impulses. But nothing in his experience accumulating wealth and managing investments had prepared him for a situation like this. "What's your name?" he asked softly, trying not to scare the child even more. His voice came out hoarser than normal, still affected by the recent fear. She didn't answer, only watched him with those disturbingly mature eyes, as if she were evaluating whether he represented another threat in her already danger-filled life. The silence stretched for miles. The rural landscape gradually gave way to scattered houses, then to an elegant neighborhood where mansions hid behind high walls and electronic gates. The millionaire felt the weight of responsibility growing in his chest. He couldn't simply abandon the child who had risked her own life to save him, but he also didn't know what to do with her. When they finally arrived at the gates of his property, an imposing 3-story mansion surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens, the girl gasped softly. It was the first time in her short and difficult life that she had seen so much opulence together. The white marble columns, the enormous windows with crystal-clear glass, the cobblestone driveway that snaked through flowering beds. Everything seemed straight out of a fairy tale. The gate opened automatically upon recognizing the car, revealing a circular entrance where an ornamental fountain sprayed crystal-clear water. The girl had never seen so much clean water together, and her eyes were hypnotized by the smooth movement of the droplets sparkling in the afternoon sun. A middle-aged woman appeared at the main entrance of the mansion even before the car came to a complete stop. It was the housekeeper, a rigid lady, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun and dark clothes that seemed an extension of her severe personality. Her small, penetrating eyes analyzed the scene with evident disapproval. First, the disheveled state of her boss, then the inexplicable presence of the dirty and poorly dressed child. "Sir, what happened? And who is this child?" she asked with a coldness that cut through the air like a blade. She had worked for the family for over 15 years, since before her boss's marriage, and considered herself the guardian not only of the house, but of the reputation and wealth accumulated over the years. The millionaire got out of the car with movements still a little shaky, automatically smoothing the rumpled suit in a futile attempt to regain his usual composure. There was an incident on the road. This girl saved me, literally saved my life. His voice carried a mixture of gratitude and confusion, as if he still couldn't completely believe what had happened. The housekeeper looked at the child with growing skepticism. Saved? Sir, with all due respect, she can barely stand. How could a child in that condition save anyone? It was true that the girl's appearance was shocking. In the clear afternoon light, her extreme malnutrition became even more evident. Her arms were thin as twigs, her legs barely able to support her minimal weight, and her angular face revealed cheekbones too prominent for such a small child. Her clothes seemed to have been collected from trash, patched with different pieces of fabric that created a desolate mosaic of poverty. "It doesn't matter how she did it," replied the businessman with a firmness that surprised even himself. "The fact is, she did. And now it's our responsibility to take care of her." The housekeeper opened her mouth to protest, but was interrupted by a child's voice coming from the internal staircase of the mansion. "Daddy, you're back!" A 4-year-old boy ran down the marble stairs, his expensive shoes echoing in the entrance hall. It was evident that he was the millionaire's son. He had the same penetrating blue eyes and the same aristocratic bone structure, although his appearance was of someone who had never known need. His clothes were impeccable, his hair perfectly combed, and he carried an expensive toy in his hand. When he saw the girl, he stopped abruptly. The contrast between the two was stark. He, well-nourished and dressed like a little prince, she, skeletal and covered in dirt from the road. The boy frowned with an expression of discomfort, as if her presence were a stain on his perfect world. "Who is she, Daddy? Why is she so dirty?" he asked, with the unconscious cruelty typical of privileged children. He had been raised surrounded by luxury and servants, accustomed to having all his wishes met immediately. The sight of extreme poverty was something completely outside his limited experience. The millionaire knelt down to be at his son's level, his hands still slightly trembling, resting on the boy's small shoulders. "This special girl helped me today. She's going to stay with us for a while." "But she's dirty!" protested the boy, taking a step back as if the dirt were contagious. "And she smells bad." The innocent cruelty of the words struck the girl like physical blows. She cowered even more, trying to become invisible. She knew that kind of rejection well. She had faced disgusted looks and cruel comments throughout her years living on the streets. But somehow, coming from a child her own age, it hurt differently. The housekeeper watched the scene with ill-disguised satisfaction. She could see that the girl's presence was already causing disruption in the carefully maintained order of the house. "Sir, perhaps it would be better to contact the appropriate authorities. Surely there are institutions equipped to care for homeless children." The millionaire felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of irritation with the housekeeper's coldness and an instinctive protectiveness for the child who had risked everything to save him. "She's not going to any institution. She's staying here at least until we decide what's best for her." At that moment, the girl began to stagger. The extreme exhaustion, dehydration, and emotional shock had finally taken their toll. She collapsed right there in the entrance hall, unconscious on the cold marble. The sound of the small, fragile body hitting the marble echoed through the hall like a silent cry for help. The millionaire moved instinctively, his reflections on investments and profits completely forgotten in the face of the urgency of the real human crisis. He knelt beside the unconscious girl, his business expertise utterly useless in this moment. "Call a doctor, now," he ordered the housekeeper, his voice carrying the authority he used to move millions in stock shares. But when he touched the child's forehead, his hands trembled again. The skin was too hot, burning with fever, and she weighed so little that she felt like paper. The housekeeper hesitated for a moment, clearly reluctant to involve doctors in a situation she considered problematic. "Sir, perhaps it would be better to take her to a public hospital. We know nothing about this child, her background, if she has diseases." "I said call a doctor!" He cut her off, his patience running out. The tone was the same he used when his orders regarding wealth and investments were questioned, cold, definitive, and with no room for discussion. "Dr. Henricks, tell him it's urgent." As the housekeeper muttered and left to make the call, the millionaire's son watched the scene with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. There was something disturbing about seeing someone his age in such a fragile state. It was like looking at a distorted mirror of himself. Both were 4 years old, but the similarities ended there. "Is she going to die, Daddy?" asked the boy with the honest brutality typical of children. There was no malice in his words, only a genuine curiosity about a concept that, fortunately, was still abstract in his protected life. "No," replied the father with a firmness that tried to convince himself as much as his son. "We're not going to let that happen." He picked up the girl in his arms with extreme care, surprised again at how light she was. It was like carrying an injured bird, all that fragility concentrated in a frame that seemed about to fall apart. He carried her up the marble staircase, his footsteps echoing in the tense silence of the house. His son followed them from a distance, staying far enough away not to be contaminated by that uncomfortable reality, but close enough to satisfy his morbid curiosity. The guest room that the millionaire chose was larger than many entire houses, with fine wood furniture, silk curtains, and a bed that looked like an altar of comfort. When he laid the girl on the immaculate white sheets, the contrast was shocking. She looked like a stain of suffering on all that perfection, her tangled hair spread like dark webs on the feather pillow. The doctor arrived in 20 minutes, carrying his leather bag and a worried expression. Dr. Henricks had been the family's private physician for years, accustomed to treating occasional colds and routine checkups of wealthy people. When he saw the child's condition, his expression changed to something between shock and professional indignation. "My God, how long has she been in this condition?" he murmured, checking her vital signs with experienced hands. "This child is severely malnourished, dehydrated, and these marks—" He pointed to small scars and bruises that dotted her thin arms. "Someone has hurt her, repeatedly." The millionaire felt something clench in his chest. He knew the signs of violence well. He had seen similar things in reports of cases that affected his businesses, especially when his business decisions impacted working families. But seeing it in reality, in such a small child, was completely different. "Can she recover?" he asked, realizing that his voice came out lower than normal. There was something in the girl's vulnerability that touched a part of himself that he had buried long ago, since he lost his wife. "With proper care, yes, but it will be a long process. She will need special feeding, controlled hydration, constant medical monitoring." The doctor paused significantly. "And a lot of love. Children in this state, they need to relearn to trust the world." The housekeeper, who had remained at the door during the examination, seized the opportunity. "Dr. Henricks, don't you think it would be more appropriate to transfer the child to a specialized hospital? We have our routine here, and caring for a child in these conditions—" "Absolutely not," interrupted the millionaire with a firmness that surprised even him. "She stays here. Do whatever is necessary, doctor. Money is no object." It was strange how the phrase sounded different this time. It wasn't about increasing his wealth or expanding investments, but about using his wealth for something that really mattered. After the doctor left with promises to return the next day and a list of necessary medications and supplements, the house fell into a heavy silence. The girl slept under the effect of a light sedative, her small fists clenched, even unconscious, as if she was still preparing to fight. The millionaire's son appeared in the doorway of the room, holding his favorite toy, a remote control car that cost more than many families earn in a month. "Daddy, why do you want to take care of her? She's not our family." The question hit the businessman unexpectedly. Why indeed? He had built his financial empire based on logic, cold calculations, analyses of risk and return. What kind of return would there be in caring for a street child? What kind of investment was this that would only drain resources without generating profit? "Sometimes," he said slowly, still trying to understand his own motivations, "we do things not because they are smart from a business point of view, but because they are right from a human point of view." "But what if she's bad? What if she steals our things?" insisted the boy, clearly echoing opinions he had heard from the housekeeper. At that moment, the girl stirred slightly in bed, mumbling something unintelligible in her sleep. It was a broken, frightened sound, as if even in her dreams she found no peace. The millionaire approached and for an instant thought he heard her whisper, "Thank you," among the feverish murmurs. During the night, he stayed awake in the office, looking out the window at the illuminated gardens where his fortune had brought aesthetic perfection. But his mind was not on the numbers that normally dominated his thoughts. Dividends, interest, cash flow. Instead, he thought of a skeletal child who had risked her own safety to save a complete stranger. The housekeeper appeared at the door of the office in the early hours of the morning, carrying a tray with coffee that he hadn't even ordered. "Sir, may I speak frankly?" He nodded, although he suspected he wouldn't like what was to come. "This situation could become very complicated. We know nothing about this child's past. What if she brings trouble? What if someone comes looking for her? You have your reputation, your business, your son to protect." "And what do you suggest?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "That we hand her over to the appropriate authorities first thing tomorrow. It was a noble gesture to save her, but now it's the state's responsibility." The millionaire was silent for a long moment, remembering the sensation of the stone hitting the kidnapper, the inexplicable courage of a hungry child facing adult and violent men to save someone she didn't even know. "She risked her life for me," he said finally. "A child who had no reason whatsoever to help me, who has probably only known cruelty from adults, decided to protect me. How can I do less for her?" The housekeeper pursed her lips into a thin line of disapproval, but said nothing more. She knew she had known her boss long enough to recognize that tone. It was the same one he used when making irreversible business decisions, but as she withdrew, her eyes flashed with a cold determination. If the boss didn't see the problems that child would bring, it was up to her to protect the family and the house that she had considered her responsibility for so many years. 3 weeks had passed since the girl arrived at the mansion, and the routine of the house had changed in ways that no one expected. The millionaire had hired a nurse specializing in child nutrition, transformed the guest room into a kind of medical recovery center, and completely revised his schedules to monitor the child's progress. The girl was still extremely fragile, but the first signs of improvement were beginning to appear. Her skin had lost that sickly yellowish tone, her hair was beginning to grow stronger, and, most importantly, she had begun to speak. Whispered words, hesitant, as if each syllable were a test to see if she would be punished for using her voice. What impressed everyone most was her sharp intelligence. Despite appearing 2 years old due to malnutrition, she demonstrated an understanding of the world that went far beyond her chronological age. She observed everything with microscopic attention, as if she were cataloging every detail for use in her future survival. It was a disturbing characteristic in such a small child. On that Saturday morning, the millionaire, Mr. Abernathy, was in his office reviewing reports of his holdings when he heard a sharp cry coming from the garden. He immediately recognized his son's voice and ran to the window. What he saw made him descend the stairs 2 steps at a time. In the central garden, surrounded by ornamental fountains and beds of imported flowers, his son was on the ground crying. while the girl positioned herself defensively between him and three other children. They were the children of other business executives, invited for a morning of play that the housekeeper had organized as part of the boys' social education. "Your dad's nothing but a crook," shouted the biggest of the boys, a sturdy, blonde-haired boy whose father competed directly with Mr. Abernathy in the investment sector. "My dad says he steals money from poor people and then lives like a king." "And you," continued another boy, pointing at the girl, "you're just a dirty beggar who came here to steal too. Go back to the trash where you came from." The girl didn't flinch. Despite still weighing half of what she should for her age, there was something fierce in her posture. Her small fists were clenched, and she fixed the aggressors with an intensity reminiscent of a cornered animal ready to fight. "Leave him alone," she said in a firm voice, surprisingly clear for someone who had spent weeks barely able to whisper. "He didn't do anything to you." "Look at that," laughed the group leader. "The little beggar has become a bodyguard." "How cute." He moved closer, clearly prepared to push both the girl and the millionaire's son. It was then that the girl did something no one expected. With quick and precise movements that she had obviously learned defending herself on the streets, she grabbed a handful of wet soil from the flower bed and threw it into the aggressor's eyes. While he screamed and tried to clean his face, she moved to completely protect the millionaire's son, placing herself as a human shield between him and the other boys. "If you want to hurt him, you'll have to go through me first," she declared, and there was something in the way she said it that made even the other children recoil. It was the voice of someone who had already faced things much worse than playground bullies. Mr. Abernathy arrived at the garden at that moment, followed by the housekeeper, who huffed with indignation. "What is going on here?" he demanded, using the authoritative tone that commanded boardrooms of large corporations. "Daddy!" cried his son, running to hide behind him. "They were being mean. They said bad things about you, and the girl, she defended me." The other parents began to arrive, attracted by the noise. What followed was an embarrassing scene where each family tried to justify their children's behavior, while casting looks of disapproval at both the girl and the overall situation. "Well," said the mother of the lead boy, an elegant woman whose diamonds shone brighter than her compassion, "perhaps if certain people didn't bring inappropriate elements into family environments, our children wouldn't have to deal with situations like this." The phrase was said, looking directly at the girl, who visibly shrank under the weight of the collective judgment. Mr. Abernathy felt the anger grow in his chest, not only because of the cruelty directed at the child, but because of the blatant hypocrisy of people who preached Christian values while demonstrating zero compassion for a child in need. "Inappropriate elements?" he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "This inappropriate element has just demonstrated more courage and loyalty than any of your spoiled children. She protected my son when he was being attacked by 3 larger children." "But look at her," protested another father. "She obviously comes from a troubled background. What kind of example does that set for our children?" At that moment, the girl did something that silenced everyone present. She walked to the millionaire's son, who was still crying softly, and gently took his small hand in her even smaller one. "Don't cry," she said with a sweetness that contrasted completely with the ferocity she had demonstrated moments before. "Bad people always say bad things when they're jealous. Your daddy is good. He gave me food when I was hungry, a place to sleep when I had none. He is the best man I know." The words were said with such pure sincerity that even the most critical parents were momentarily speechless. There was something in the way the girl spoke, not like a child trying to impress adults, but as someone who had experienced the worst of humanity and could recognize the best when she found it. The millionaire's son stopped crying and looked at the girl with a new expression. It was the first time someone had physically protected him, the first time he had witnessed real courage in action. His whole life had been protected by high walls, security guards, and his father's money. But there was someone smaller and weaker than him, putting herself in danger to defend him. "Thank you," he murmured, squeezing her hand. "You were very brave." The housekeeper watched the scene with increasing irritation. She could see that the dynamics of the house were changing in ways she couldn't control. The boy, who had always been obedient and dependent on the approval of adults, was beginning to form independent bonds, and the boss was clearly becoming attached to that child in a way that would interfere with her plans to maintain total control over the family. After the guests left with thinly veiled excuses and empty promises to reorganize future gatherings, Mr. Abernathy found himself alone in the garden with the two children. He observed how they interacted, his son, for the first time, treating someone as an equal instead of an inferior, and the girl showing a kindness that had survived all the cruelties she had faced. "You get along well," he observed, feeling something warm in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, since before he became obsessed with wealth and holdings, when he still believed that money was a means to an end, not the end itself. "She's cool, Dad," said his son, with the direct honesty of children. "She doesn't care that I'm not good at fighting, and she knows a lot of stories." "What kind of stories?" asked Mr. Abernathy, curious. The girl hesitated, as she always did when she was the center of attention. "Stories about the birds I saw when I was alone. They were my friends when I had no one." It was an answer that broke the businessman's heart. To imagine that little child, alone and hungry, finding solace in birds. It made him think of his own childhood, before he discovered the power of money and success, when simple things still had meaning. That night, after both children were asleep, he found himself in the office looking at financial documents without really seeing them. His mind was occupied with the scene in the garden, with the girl's courage, with how his son had changed in recent weeks. The housekeeper appeared at the door with her usual tray of coffee, but this time her expression was more somber than usual. "Sir, we need to talk about the situation with the girl," she said, closing the door behind her. "Things are getting out of control." "How so?" he asked, although he suspected what was coming. "She's influencing your son in ways that are concerning. She's making him question things, act rebellious, and after today's incident, our entire social network is talking. This could affect your business, your reputation." Mr. Abernathy sighed, recognizing the familiar pattern. Whenever something threatened the status quo, whenever some genuine change began to happen, the concerns about reputation and business appeared. "And what do you suggest?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "That we find a suitable family to adopt her, far away from here, a family that can give her a proper life without compromising ours." At that moment, a soft sound came from upstairs. The girl's voice humming softly, a melody she had invented. It was a sweet and melancholy sound, full of cautious hope. And in that simple melody, Mr. Abernathy heard something that money had never been able to buy: the possibility of redemption. 2 months had passed since the girl's arrival, and the nightmares began in the 5th week. First, there were muffled screams during the early morning hours, which woke the whole house. Then came the nights when she simply couldn't sleep, remaining awake until dawn, with her eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if she were watching some invisible threat. Mr. Abernathy had hired a child psychologist specializing in trauma, but the progress was slow and painful. During the sessions, disturbing fragments of the girl's past emerged like shards of glass, cutting through the air. Stories of hunger so intense that she ate garbage, of nights sleeping in icy alleys, of people who hurt her just for fun. "She has developed extremely sophisticated survival mechanisms for someone so young," explained the doctor after a particularly difficult session. "But that also means she doesn't know how to just be a child. She's constantly in alert mode, expecting the safety to end at any moment." On that specific night, Mr. Abernathy was awakened by sounds coming from the girl's room. It wasn't screaming this time, but something worse: a low, continuous crying. as if she were trying to console herself without waking anyone. When he arrived at the room, he found her huddled in a corner, trembling violently. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly, approaching slowly. He had learned that sudden movement scared her. It was just a nightmare. "They're going to take me back," she whispered, her voice broken by fear. "I dreamed that the bad men came to get me, that you decided you don't want me here anymore." The words pierced Mr. Abernathy's heart unexpectedly. In recent months, while following her recovery, something had changed inside him too. It wasn't just charity or gratitude. He had developed a genuine affection for the brave child who had risked everything to save him. "No one's going to take you," he promised, sitting on the floor next to her. "You're safe here. You always will be." "But the lady who takes care of the house doesn't like me," said the girl, showing a frighteningly sharp perception for someone her age. "She thinks I'm going to ruin everything." Maybe she's right. It was true that the housekeeper's hostility had intensified in recent weeks. Small incidents began to happen. The girl's clothes that disappeared, portions of food smaller than those recommended by the doctor. Accidents that always seemed to affect her more than anyone else in the house. "You're not going to ruin anything," he said firmly. "In fact, you've made everything better here." "How?" she asked, her large eyes shining with tears in the dark. Mr. Abernathy paused, realizing that he had never really verbalized the changes he had observed. "My son is happier. He smiles more, plays more. And he hesitated, surprised by the vulnerability in his own voice. "I had forgotten how important it is to care for someone other than myself." The next morning, during breakfast, the atmosphere was tense. The housekeeper served the meals with rigid movements that clearly demonstrated her irritation. The millionaire's son immediately noticed that the girl's portion was smaller than usual. "Why is she eating less?" he asked, with the direct curiosity of children. "The doctor said she needs to eat a lot to get strong." "Children shouldn't meddle in adult affairs," the housekeeper reprimanded dryly. "Finish your own food instead of watching others." The girl ate in silence, but Mr. Abernathy noticed how she chewed each piece slowly, as if she were savoring every crumb because she didn't know when the next meal would come. It was a habit she had developed during her years on the streets, and that she had not yet managed to completely abandon. After breakfast, when the children went out to play in the garden, he confronted the housekeeper directly. "I want you to explain why the girl's portion was smaller than that recommended by the doctor," he said, using the tone he reserved for insubordinate subordinates in his businesses. The housekeeper straightened her back, preparing for battle. "Sir, with all due respect, this situation is getting out of control. The child is manipulating you and your son. She knows exactly what to do to arouse pity." "Manipulating?" he repeated, incredulous. "She's 4 years old, and she has survived alone on the streets for years. Do you think that happens without developing certain skills?" The housekeeper made a calculated pause. "Besides, troubling information has arrived." "What kind of information?" "About the men who kidnapped you. I found out that one of them was your former employee, Carlos Mendoza. He worked in the financial department until he was fired 2 years ago for irregularities." The name hit Mr. Abernathy like a punch to the stomach. Carlos Mendoza. He remembered vaguely, a competent man who had questioned some company practices related to mass layoffs. The businessman had decided to get rid of him before he caused more problems, using allegations of irregularities that, now that he thought about it, were questionable. "What does this have to do with the girl?" he asked, although a part of him already suspected the answer. "If she really saved you from those men," said the housekeeper slowly, "how did a street child know where to find you at the exact moment of the kidnapping? Doesn't that seem like too convenient a coincidence?" The suggestion was absurd, but it planted a seed of doubt that began to grow in Mr. Abernathy's mind. He had built his fortune by being distrustful, analyzing every angle of investments and businesses. Was it possible that his emotions were blinding him to something obvious? At that moment, the sound of laughter came from the garden. Through the window, he could see the two children playing together. His son finally learning to be a normal child, the girl experiencing for the first time in her life what safety and friendship were like. The sight should have reassured him, but the housekeeper's words kept echoing in his mind. "There's something else," she continued, noticing his hesitation. "I made some discreet investigations into the girl's past. There are strange gaps in her story, periods where no one saw her on the streets, as if she disappeared completely." "What are you insinuating?" he asked, although he was afraid of the answer. "That maybe she's not the innocent victim she appears to be. That maybe she was trained, prepared for this specific situation." The idea was so bizarre that it should have been dismissed immediately. But Mr. Abernathy had survived in the business world by learning that people were capable of anything for money, and he had a lot of money. That afternoon, when the children were in the room playing, he decided to do a test. He purposely left some important financial documents scattered in his office, along with information about bank accounts and investments. If the girl was really innocent, she wouldn't pay attention. If she was part of some elaborate plan. 2 hours later, he returned to the office and found everything exactly as he had left it. He felt like an idiot for having suspected a child, but the seed of doubt planted by the housekeeper was still there, growing slowly. During dinner, he observed the girl with new eyes. He noticed how she ate quickly, almost desperately, how her eyes moved constantly, cataloguing exits and potential threats, how she seemed to choose each word carefully before speaking. But then she did something that completely destroyed his suspicions. When his son spilled juice on his shirt, she immediately offered to help clean it up, using her own sleeve to dry the liquid. It was a gesture so spontaneous, so genuinely caring, that no child trained to manipulate could have faked it. That night, after everyone was asleep, he confronted the housekeeper once more. "Your investigations about the girl," he said coldly. "I want to see concrete evidence, not speculations." Her expression wavered for a moment. "Sir, You're trying to manipulate me against an innocent child," he continued, his voice gaining the icy tone he used to destroy competitors in business. "The question is, why?" It was then that the housekeeper's mask of professionalism finally fell, revealing something much uglier underneath. The housekeeper's face contorted into an expression of pure rage that she had hidden for weeks. Her hands trembled slightly as she squeezed her apron, as if she were trying to contain decades of resentment that had finally found a release. "You want to know why?" she said, her voice losing all pretense of respect. "Because I've worked in this house for 15 years. 15 years taking care of everything, keeping this family running, being more of a mother to your son than anyone else." Mr. Abernathy recoiled slightly, shocked by the sudden transformation. The controlled and efficient woman he knew had disappeared, replaced by someone who seemed on the verge of an emotional breakdown. "And now," she continued, pacing back and forth like a caged animal, "some random child shows up and suddenly I'm not needed anymore. Suddenly everything I've built here is worth nothing. No one said you're not needed," he tried, but she cut him off with an abrupt gesture. "You don't have to say it. I see how things have changed, how you look at her, how your son prefers her company to mine. After everything I've done for this family, am I going to be replaced by a street tramp?" The word tramp came out loaded with so much venom that it seemed to poison the very air. Mr. Abernathy felt the anger explode in his chest, not just for the cruel words, but for the revelation that the woman he had trusted to take care of his son harbored so much hate. "You're fired," he said, with a coldness that cut like ice. "I want you out of my house tomorrow morning." The housekeeper turned pale, realizing she had gone too far. "Sir, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. And now I understand perfectly why the girl was receiving smaller portions, why her clothes disappeared, Why she always seemed more scared after spending time alone with you. I never hurt her, she protested, but there was something in her eyes that suggested otherwise. Get out of my sight, he ordered. And if I find out that you've done anything to harm that child, I'm going to use all my financial resources to destroy your life completely. After the housekeeper left huffing with rage, Mr. Abernathy remained in his office, trying to process what he had just discovered. The woman who had cared for his son for years had been psychologically torturing a traumatized child, motivated by unhealthy jealousy and fear of losing her position in the house. The next morning, the girl came down to breakfast with more cautious movements than usual. Her large eyes scanned the kitchen as if looking for some hidden trap. "Where is the lady?" she asked Mr. Abernathy, her voice loaded with a tension that he now completely understood. "She doesn't work here anymore," he replied gently. "She did things that weren't right." The relief that washed over the girl's face was so intense that she began to cry, not from sadness, but from an emotional release that she had suppressed for weeks. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, she truly believed that she could be safe. "She said bad things to me," she confessed between sobs. "She said that you were going to send me away soon, that I was just a problem, that your son was going to stop liking me." The millionaire's son, who had arrived in the kitchen at that moment, ran to hug his friend. "I'm never going to stop liking you," he declared with the absolute vehemence of children. "You're my best friend." During the following weeks, with the toxic presence of the housekeeper removed, the atmosphere of the house changed completely. A new employee was hired, a gentle and maternal woman who treated the girl with the same tenderness that she dedicated to her boss's son. The girl began to gain weight consistently, her nightmares lessened, and for the first time since arriving, she began to act like a normal child. But it was during this phase of apparent tranquility that the first threatening call arrived. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the phone rang in Mr. Abernathy's office. The voice on the other end was rough, clearly disguised, but loaded with a rage that made his blood run cold. "You thought you were safe, didn't you?" said the voice. "That you could continue destroying lives without consequences?" "Who is this?" asked the businessman, but he already suspected the answer. "Someone who has lost everything because of you. Someone who will not rest until you pay for every family you have destroyed with your greed." The call was terminated abruptly, leaving Mr. Abernathy staring at the phone with growing dread. It wasn't paranoia. Someone was planning something against him, and this time there might not be a brave child to save him. During the following days, more calls arrived, always at the same time, always with vague but unmistakable threats. Mr. Abernathy hired discreet security guards, installed more sophisticated security systems, but knew he was being watched. When he left for business meetings or social events, he had the constant feeling of hostile eyes following him. It was during this period of increasing tension that he discovered something that would change everything once again. He was reviewing old company documents, looking for clues about who might be threatening him, when he found a file he had completely forgotten. They were files of employees laid off in the past 5 years. And there, among dozens of names and personal stories that he had ignored at the time, he found something that made his heart stop. The file of an employee laid off 3 years ago. A 19-year-old who worked as a night cleaner and had been dismissed when they discovered she was pregnant. The employee's name was Maria Sanchez, and in the personal data, a note that a supervisor had made: "Fired for undeclared pregnancy. Child will be born in precarious conditions." The millionaire's hands trembled as he read the report. The estimated birth date of the child corresponded perfectly to the girl's age. The physical characteristics described of the mother, dark hair, large eyes, small stature, were exactly the same as those of the child who was now sleeping peacefully upstairs. But what really devastated him was the final note in the file. Employee attempted later contact requesting reinstatement due to extreme financial difficulties. Request denied. No information on current whereabouts of the employee or child. The girl who had saved his life was the daughter of a woman he had condemned to misery, a young mother who had been fired precisely when she most needed financial stability, forced onto the streets with a baby, probably dead or missing while her daughter grew up alone, facing unimaginable horrors. The cruel irony of the situation hit him like an avalanche. His wealth, his holdings in stocks and investments that generated millions in profits, had been built on decisions that destroyed families like the girl's. And now that same child, who should hate him more than anyone in the world, had risked her life to save him. That night he couldn't sleep. He stayed watching the girl sleeping peacefully in her room, knowing that she had no idea of the connection between them, knowing that if she found out the truth, he could lose her forever. But there was something even more disturbing. If Carlos Mendoza, the former employee who had kidnapped him, discovered that the girl was Maria Sanchez's daughter, if he knew that the man who had ruined his co-worker's life was now raising her daughter as if it were a charity case. The phone rang at 3 in the morning, cutting through his dark thoughts. "We found out your little secret," said the familiar voice. "The child you're using to improve your image. We know exactly who she is, and we're going to tell everyone the truth about how you destroyed her mother's life." The call was terminated, leaving the millionaire alone with the terrible certainty that his attempt at redemption was about to turn into the biggest scandal of his life. The following morning brought a storm that no one expected. Mr. Abernathy woke up to the insistent sound of the doorbell, followed by violent knocking on the main door. When he went down to answer, he found 2 social workers accompanied by a court officer, all with somber expressions and official documents in their hands. "Sir, we received a formal complaint about the situation of a minor under your care," said the lead social worker, a middle-aged woman with severe glasses and a folder full of papers. "We need to conduct an immediate investigation." The businessman's heart raced. "What kind of complaint?" "It is alleged that you are keeping a child in an irregular situation, possibly for your own benefit related to your public image. There are also accusations that the minor may be being emotionally exploited." The words hit like punches. He knew exactly who had made the complaint. Carlos Mendoza and his associates had found a way to attack him that was much more devastating than any kidnapping. They were going to destroy his reputation, and worse still, take the girl back to the system that would probably put her in a situation as bad as the streets. "The child is well cared for," he said, trying to remain calm. "She has medical, psychological care, everything properly documented." "We will check that," replied the officer dryly. "Where is the minor?" At that moment the girl came down the stairs holding the hand of the millionaire's son. Both had just woken up and were still wearing pajamas, their tousled hair and sleepy faces demonstrating the innocence of childhood. When she saw the strangers in the room, the girl instinctively hid behind the boy, her eyes filling with the familiar terror that he thought had disappeared forever. "Hello, dear," said the social worker, with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We came to talk to you. Can you tell us how you are being treated here?" The girl squeezed her friend's hand even tighter, her breathing becoming irregular. It was obvious that the presence of the authorities had triggered traumatic memories of other interventions, other moments where unknown adults had decided her fate without considering her feelings. "She's scared," said the millionaire's son, with the instinctive protection he had developed for his friend. "You're making her afraid." "It's normal, dear," replied the social worker. "Sometimes children get confused about what's best for them." For the next 2 hours, the house was thoroughly searched. Each room was inspected, each medical document analyzed, each detail of the girl's routine questioned. The professionals interviewed both her and the millionaire's son separately, looking for signs of manipulation or abuse. What most disturbed the businessman was seeing how the girl reacted during the interview. All the trust she had built up over the months seemed to evaporate at the possibility of being removed again. She answered the questions with monosyllables, her eyes fixed on the floor, as if she were mentally preparing for yet another painful separation. "The child shows signs of anxious attachment," muttered one of the assistants to the other, thinking that he couldn't hear. "This may indicate emotional manipulation by the current caregiver." The irony of the situation was cruel. The girl was being punished for finally having found safety, for having developed healthy bonds after years of abandonment. Her fear of losing that stability was being interpreted as evidence that the situation was harmful. After the inspection, the group met in the room for discussion. The verdict was devastating. "Based on our initial assessment," said the court officer, "we have determined that there is sufficient evidence to temporarily remove the minor from this environment while a more thorough investigation is conducted." "No!" shouted the millionaire's son, running to position himself defensively in front of his friend. "You can't take her. She's our family." The girl said nothing, but silent tears began to stream down her face. It was as if all her worst expectations were being confirmed, that safety was always temporary, that people she trusted would always end up abandoning her. "The process may take several weeks," continued the social worker, ignoring the children's despair. "During that time, the minor will stay in a suitable temporary home." "Suitable according to whom?" exploded the millionaire, his patience finally running out. "This child was literally starving to death when she got here. Now she's healthy, happy, has full medical care. How is that not suitable?" "Sir, we understand your emotional bond," said the officer with a condescending tone that made his anger boil. "But there are protocols to be followed, especially considering the allegations about your motivations." It was then that the girl did something that silenced the entire room. In a small but clear voice, she finally spoke. "Please don't take me from here," she said, looking directly at the social worker. "I know you think he's bad, but he saved me. When I was hungry, he gave me food. When I was scared, he protected me. And he never hurt me." Her words carried a devastating sincerity that made even the most rigid officer hesitate for a moment. But the system had its rules, and rules were more important than feelings. "Honey, sometimes children can't see when they're being—" began the social worker. "I know when adults are bad," interrupted the girl with a firmness that surprised everyone. "I know bad people. They hurt me before, but he's not bad. He's good. And if you take me from here, you'll be doing a bad thing to me." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of cars arriving outside. Through the window, the millionaire saw something that made his blood run cold. Television vans with satellite dishes, reporters carrying cameras and microphones, a growing crowd of onlookers attracted by the spectacle. "How did the press know about this?" he asked, but he already knew the answer. Whoever was orchestrating that attack had ensured that it would be public, that the humiliation would be complete. In the following minutes, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Reporters tried to force their way onto the property, shouting questions about the child held captive by the millionaire and speculating about the true motives behind the situation. The girl was obviously terrified by the chaos. She clung to the millionaire as if he were her only anchor in a storm she didn't understand. "Why are they shouting?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible above the noise. "Because sometimes people make noise about things they don't understand," he replied, hugging her protectively. But he knew he couldn't protect her from what was coming. The social worker made a quick call, probably asking for reinforcements to deal with the media situation. When she hung up, her expression was even more somber. "Due to the public attention now involved," she said, "the removal needs to happen immediately. We cannot allow the minor to be exposed to more media trauma." "You're creating the trauma," protested the businessman. "She was perfectly fine until you got here." But it was already too late. The decision had been made, not based on the child's well-being, but on bureaucratic convenience and external pressure. A temporary home had already been contacted, papers were being prepared, and the removal would happen within an hour. During those crucial 60 minutes, the millionaire tried desperately to find a legal solution. He called lawyers, political contacts, anyone with influence who could intervene. But the system moved with the inexorability of a machine, crushing individual lives under the weight of impersonal procedures. The girl spent the remaining time in her room, packing the few belongings she had accumulated in the month she had lived in the mansion. They were simple things: some clothes, a teddy bear that the millionaire's son had given her, drawings she had made showing her new happy family. When the time finally came, she came down the stairs carrying a small suitcase, her eyes dry but empty. She had disconnected emotionally, returning to the survival mode that had kept her alive on the streets. "I promise I'm going to fight to bring you back," whispered the millionaire as she passed him towards the door. She stopped and looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said simply, "but sometimes promises can't beat bad people." And with those devastating words, she left the house that had become her first real home, leaving behind a broken family and a man who finally understood that all his wealth was useless when it really mattered. 3 weeks had passed since the girl was taken from the mansion, and life in the grand house had become a dark reflection of what it once was. The millionaire's son refused to play alone, spending hours sitting at the window of the room that had been hers, waiting as if he could make her appear through willpower. His meals were left half-eaten, and the nightmares that had once tormented his friend now visited his dreams. The businessman had become an obsessive version of himself, spending fortunes on lawyers and private investigators. His investments continued to generate astronomical profits, but the money seemed completely meaningless when it couldn't solve the only problem that really mattered. His offices were bombarded by reporters, his businesses scrutinized by the media, but none of that mattered compared to the emptiness left by the child's absence. The temporary home chosen for the girl was technically adequate: a middle-aged couple with experience in special care and a house in the suburbs that met all the bureaucratic requirements. But the reports that arrived through official channels were concerning. The child had regressed significantly, returning to present symptoms of acute trauma that had disappeared during her stay in the mansion. "She doesn't talk anymore," reported the social worker during a follow-up visit to the millionaire's office. "Barely eats, doesn't play, spends most of her time sitting in silence looking out the window. The temporary family is worried." "Then bring her back!" he exploded, his patience long exhausted with the inefficient bureaucracy. "It's obvious that she was better here." "Sir, the legal process is still ongoing. There are serious allegations being investigated," replied the official with the professional coldness that she had learned to use as a shield against emotionally charged situations. "What allegations? That I was taking too good care of her? That she was too happy? Too healthy?" At that moment his phone rang. It was his lead attorney with news that would change everything again. "We found something important," said the tense voice on the other end of the line. "About who's behind the complaints. You need to come to the office right now." An hour later, the millionaire was sitting in a meeting room facing a revelation that left him speechless. Spread across the table were documents, photographs and recordings that painted a very different picture from what he had imagined. "Carlos Mendoza wasn't acting alone," explained the lawyer, pointing to a series of telephone records. "He was contacted by someone within your own social circle. Someone who knew intimate details about your life and had privileged access to information about the child." "Who?" asked the businessman, although a part of him already suspected the answer. "Your former housekeeper," replied the lawyer, sliding a photograph across the table. "She not only provided information to Mendoza, but orchestrated the entire defamation campaign. The threatening calls, the coordination with the media, even the exact timing of the social services intervention, everything was planned by her." The betrayal was even deeper than he had imagined. The woman who had cared for his family for 15 years had allied herself with his enemies, using the intimate knowledge she possessed about his vulnerabilities to cause the maximum possible damage. "There's more," continued the lawyer, hesitant. "We discovered something about the girl's mother, Maria Sanchez. She wasn't dead as we assumed." The millionaire's heart stopped for a moment. "What do you mean?" "She's alive, but in complicated conditions. After the dismissal, she fell into a downward spiral, ended up getting involved with dangerous people, developed addictions, lost custody of her daughter to the state when the child was only 2 years old." The implications of the revelation hit like an avalanche. The girl had not spent her entire life on the streets. She had been taken from her biological mother by the same system that was now removing her from her adoptive home. It was a cruel cycle of separations and institutionalized abandonment. "Where is she now?" asked the businessman. "In a rehabilitation clinic on the outskirts of the city. She has been trying to recover for almost a year, but—" The lawyer hesitated. "She doesn't know that we found her daughter. She doesn't know that the child was in your care." The irony of the situation was devastating. He had spent months caring for the daughter of the woman whose life he had destroyed without knowing the connection between them. And now that same connection could be the key to solving everything, or to making things infinitely worse. "I want to talk to her," he said finally. "To Maria. She has the right to know about her daughter." "This could complicate the legal situation even further," warned the lawyer. "If she claims custody, then let her claim it. At least it would be someone who really loves the child." 2 days later, the millionaire was sitting in a sterile room at the rehabilitation clinic, waiting for a meeting that could change everything. When Maria Sanchez entered, he was shocked by her appearance. It was possible to see where the girl had inherited her delicate features, but years of abuse and neglect had deeply marked the young woman. Her dark hair was clean but dull. Her large eyes seemed constantly haunted, and there was a fragility in her movements that mirrored her daughter's. "You're the man who fired me," she said without preamble, her voice loaded not with anger, but with resigned sadness. "I remember you." "I am," he admitted, feeling the weight of guilt press on his chest. "And I came to talk about your daughter." The change in Maria's expression was instantaneous and devastating. Her eyes filled with tears, her hands began to tremble, and for a moment she seemed about to faint. "My daughter is dead," she whispered. "They lost her when everything fell apart. They said she ran away from the shelter, that no one could find her." "She's not dead," he said gently. "She found me, saved me actually, and has been living with me for the past few months." What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of the millionaire's life. He told her about the kidnapping, about how the girl had risked everything to save him, about the months of recovery and happiness that she had experienced in the mansion. Maria listened in silence, tears streaming constantly down her face. "Is she okay?" she asked finally. "Really okay?" "She was," he replied honestly, "until social services removed her from my house 3 weeks ago. Now she's regressed. She's traumatized again." "Because of me," said Maria, her voice breaking. "Everything that happened to her is because of me. If I hadn't gotten lost in drugs after I was fired—" "It's not your fault," interrupted the businessman, surprising himself with the sincerity of the words. "It's my fault. I fired you when you most needed stability. I forced you into an impossible situation. But you took care of her when I couldn't," replied Maria. "You were the father she never had." The silence that followed was loaded with a shared pain that transcended guilt and responsibility. Two adults who had failed an innocent child, each in their own way, trying to find a way to fix what had been broken. "What do we do now?" asked Maria finally. "We fight for her," replied the millionaire. "Together. You are the biological mother. I am the one who has the resources to fight the system. Maybe together we can bring her back to where she really wants to be." It was then that the door of the room opened and a nurse entered with an urgent expression on her face. "Sorry to interrupt, but there is an urgent call for you," she said, addressing the businessman. "It's about the girl. It seems something serious has happened." The phone was being extended to him when the sound reached his ears. The siren of an ambulance passing through the street, taking someone to the hospital. And in the back of his mind, a voice whispered what he most feared, that perhaps it was already too late to fix anything. The call that changed everything came from the municipal hospital. The doctor's voice was professional, but loaded with concern as he explained that the girl had been admitted after a severe collapse at the temporary family's house. Acute malnutrition, extreme dehydration, and signs of profound psychological trauma had combined in a crisis that almost cost her life. The millionaire and Maria rushed to the hospital, a strange partnership formed by shared despair. During the journey, he watched the biological mother fight against the panic, her hands trembling as she murmured broken prayers for a daughter she barely knew. It was painful to see how guilt had become a second skin for that young woman, covering every thought and movement with regret. When they arrived at the hospital, they found a scene that broke both their hearts. The girl was in a pediatric bed, connected to tubes and monitors, her fragile little body looking even smaller under the white hospital sheets. Her eyes were closed, but even unconscious she stirred restlessly, as if she were fighting against invisible nightmares. "What happened exactly?" asked the businessman to the attending physician, Dr. Martinez, an experienced man who had seen many cases of child trauma throughout his career. According to her foster family, she simply stopped eating a week ago, refused any food, barely drank water. This morning, she collapsed trying to get out of bed. The doctor paused, consulting the chart. "This isn't just physical. She's intentionally allowing herself to waste away." Maria sobbed at these words, covering her face with her hands. "My baby is trying to hurt herself because of me." "No," Dr. Martinez said gently. "She's trying to protect herself the only way she knows how. Children who have experienced multiple abandonments sometimes develop this mechanism. If they become small and invisible enough, maybe the pain will stop." Mr. Abernathy approached the bed, observing the pale face of the child who had saved his life months ago. It was impossible to believe this was the same brave girl who faced armed grown men, now slowly surrendering to sadness. "May I touch her?" he asked the doctor. "You can try. Sometimes familiar contact helps." When his hand gently touched the girl's forehead, she stirred slightly, her eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus on his face. For a moment, a spark of recognition flickered in her vacant gaze. "You came," she whispered, her voice so weak it was barely audible. "I thought you'd forgotten me." "I would never forget you," he replied, feeling his own tears threatening to spill. "I've been fighting to bring you back since day one." It was then that Maria tentatively approached the bed. The girl looked at her with confusion, clearly not recognizing this woman who seemed strangely familiar. "Who is she?" the child asked, her voice laden with exhaustion. Mr. Abernathy looked at Maria, who nodded through her tears. It was time for the truth, however painful. "This is your mother," he said softly. "Your real mother. She's been looking for you for a long time." The girl's reaction was instant and devastating. Her eyes filled with tears, but not of joy, of a deep old pain that had long been buried. "My mother abandoned me," she said with a cruelty that cut Maria like a knife. "My mother didn't want me." "That's not true," Maria cried, kneeling beside the bed. "I always wanted you. I got lost. I made bad choices and couldn't take care of you like I should have, but I never stopped loving you." "Then why did you leave?" the girl asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you leave me alone?" What followed was a conversation that should have happened years earlier, between a mother destroyed by life and a daughter who had grown up without understanding why she had been abandoned. Maria told of the dismissal, how she had gotten lost in drugs trying to cope with the pain, how the system had taken her daughter before she could recover. "I tried to find you," Maria sobbed. "I searched every shelter, asked everyone, but you had disappeared. I thought I'd lost you forever." "I ran away," admitted the girl, "from the bad places they put me. I thought if I stayed on the streets, maybe you'd find me." The conversation was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of an official delegation. The social worker who had removed the girl from the mansion entered, accompanied by 2 lawyers and a man in an expensive suit, who Mr. Abernathy didn't recognize. "Sir, I need to inform you that there is a court order to transfer the minor to a specialized institution," said the social worker, brandishing official documents. "The current situation has become unsustainable." "What institution?" asked the millionaire, already fearing the answer. "A state-run orphanage 200 miles away. She will receive appropriate professional care away from the current emotional complications." The girl heard these words, and something broke definitively inside her. She began to cry with an intensity that made the medical monitors trigger alarms. It was the sound of a child who had lost faith in the possibility that adults could protect her. "Don't take her," Maria begged, positioning herself defensively beside the bed. "I'm her mother. I have rights." "Ma'am, your rights were suspended when you lost custody 2 years ago," replied one of the lawyers coldly. "You have no legal authority over this child." "What about me?" asked Mr. Abernathy. "I've been taking care of her. She's under my legal responsibility." "Your responsibility is also being questioned due to the questionable circumstances under which you assumed care of the minor," replied the second lawyer. It was then that the man in the suit spoke for the first time. "My name is Dr. Heath Silvera, director of the institution that will receive the child. We guarantee she will receive appropriate treatment for her condition." Something in the man's tone made Mr. Abernathy shudder. There was a clinical coldness in his voice that suggested he saw the girl not as a person, but as a case to be processed. "What kind of treatment?" asked Dr. Martinez, clearly concerned. "Intensive therapy to detach the child from the harmful attachments she has developed," replied Dr. Silvera. "Sometimes it is necessary to break inappropriate emotional connections to allow for healthy development." The words were an emotional death sentence disguised as medical jargon. The millionaire immediately understood that taking the girl to that institution would be destroying any chance of recovery she might have. "That's monstrous," he said, his voice laden with a rage that made everyone in the room recoil. "You're talking about breaking the only positive bonds this child has managed to form in her entire life." "Sir, please keep your composure," said the social worker. "The decision has already been made." It was at that moment that the girl, who had listened to everything through her tears, did something no one expected. With a strength that seemed impossible for someone in her condition, she sat up in bed and looked directly at Dr. Silvera. "I'm not going," she said, her voice small but firm. "You can't make me go if I don't want to." "Darling, you are a minor," replied Dr. Silvera condescendingly. "You have no choice in the matter." "Then I'll run away," she declared with the same fierce determination she had shown when she saved the millionaire. "I know how to run away. I've done it before." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Everyone in the room knew she wasn't bluffing. She was a child who had survived alone on the streets for years. If she decided to run, she would probably succeed. It was then that Maria made a decision that would change everything once again. "I'm going to fight for custody of her," she said, rising with a determination that surprised everyone. "I am the biological mother, and I am in recovery. I have rights that can be restored. And I'll help her," added Mr. Abernathy. "With the best lawyers money can buy." Dr. Silvera smiled coldly. "You have no idea what you're up against. The system always wins in the end." But as he spoke, none of them noticed that the girl had stopped crying. In her large, determined eyes, a spark of hope had been rekindled. For the first time in her life, two adults were willing to fight for her together. What they didn't know was that the battle that was about to begin would reveal secrets that would change not only the girl's destiny, but the understanding of the whole situation that had led them there. The legal battle that followed was unlike anything Mr. Abernathy had faced in his years dominating the business world. His fortunes accumulated through stock investments and applications in bitcoins meant little in the face of a bureaucratic system that operated with its own cruel rules. For 2 intense weeks, lawyers gathered in sterile rooms while the girl remained in the municipal hospital, recovering physically but regressing emotionally with each passing day. Maria had moved to a small apartment near the hospital, using her limited savings to be near her daughter during supervised visits. It was painful to watch how she tried to rebuild a connection that had been broken by years of separation and trauma. The girl responded shyly to her gestures of affection, but there was an invisible barrier between them. Lost time could not simply be erased with goodwill. The millionaire's son had become a shadow of himself, refusing to play or eat properly. He spent hours drawing figures of his friend and constantly asking when she would come home. It was as if an essential part of the family had been torn away, leaving a void that no amount of expensive toys or distractions could fill. It was during one of those tense weeks that the first bombshell revelation emerged. The businessman's lead attorney had discovered something disturbing about Dr. Heath Silvera and the institution he ran. "His organization is not what it seems," explained the attorney during an urgent meeting at the hospital. "Officially, it is a model orphanage with government funding, but there are serious complaints being investigated discreetly." "What kind of complaints?" asked the millionaire, though he feared the answer. "Systematic psychological abuse, children being over-medicated to keep them docile, and there are indications that some children simply disappear from official records." The revelation made the businessman's blood run cold. The girl who had saved his life was being pushed into a situation that could be worse than anything she had faced on the streets. "We need concrete evidence," he said, his business mind automatically seeking strategies. "Something we can use in court. We're already working on it, but it will take time, and the transfer is scheduled for tomorrow." That night, Mr. Abernathy made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't rely solely on the legal system. He needed a more direct approach. Using his network of business contacts and considerable financial resources, he hired private investigators to infiltrate Dr. Silvera's institution. Meanwhile, Maria had reached a devastating conclusion of her own. During a visit to the girl, she observed how the child reacted every time official staff appeared. The instant fear that returned to her eyes, the way she physically cringed. It was obvious that forcing another transition would be potentially fatal to the girl's already fragile emotional state. "I need to do something," Maria said to Mr. Abernathy that night as they met in the hospital hallway. "I can't let them take her to that place." "What do you have in mind?" "Something that could destroy any chance I have of regaining legal custody," she replied, her voice laden with desperate determination. "But if there's one thing I've learned in rehab, it's that sometimes you have to choose between doing what's legal and doing what's right." It was then that she revealed her plan. During her years on the streets, she had developed connections with people who operated outside the legal system, people who could help a desperate mother protect her daughter, even if it meant living as fugitives. "Maria, that's crazy," protested the businessman. "If you run, you'll never be able to stop running. I'd rather live on the run with my daughter alive than see her destroyed by a system that cares more about paperwork than children." At that moment, a nurse appeared running down the hall. "Quick! The girl is having a crisis!" They rushed into the room and found a terrible scene. The girl was awake but clearly in a panic, screaming and thrashing against doctors trying to calm her. Her eyes were fixed on the door, as if she was seeing something that no one else could see. "They're here," she screamed. "The bad men are here to take me." Mr. Abernathy looked around and saw that there was no one but the medical staff. "There's no one here, honey. You're safe." "No, they're here. I can feel it," she insisted, her tears streaming desperately. "They want to take me to the bad place." It was then that Maria understood. The girl wasn't hallucinating. She was sensing the presence of the approaching threat. Dr. Silvera and his team would arrive in the morning to take her, and somehow her survival instinct had detected the imminent danger. "She's not delirious," Maria whispered to the millionaire. "She knows tomorrow is the last day." In the early hours of that morning, while the girl finally slept under light sedation, a decision was made that would change the fate of everyone involved. Mr. Abernathy and Maria met with the investigators who had returned from Dr. Silvera's institution with evidence that would make any civilized person be horrified. "You won't believe what we found," said the lead investigator, spreading photographs and documents on the table. "That place is a horror. Children locked in isolated rooms for days, forced medication that turns them into zombies, and falsified medical records to justify the treatments. The photographs showed dark corridors, rooms with padded walls, and children with vacant stares who appeared to have had their souls sucked away. It was a human processing machine disguised as a charity. "There's more," continued the investigator. "Dr. Silvera isn't really a doctor. His degree is fake, and the institution is being secretly investigated by the public ministry, but the investigation is being sabotaged from within." "Sabotaged how?" asked the businessman. "Someone with a lot of political power is protecting the operation. Complaints disappear, witnesses are intimidated, evidence mysteriously vanishes." At that moment, everything fell into place in the millionaire's mind. The orchestrated campaign against him, the abnormal speed with which social services had acted, the resistance to any attempt to question the system. It wasn't just incompetent bureaucracy. It was a deliberate operation to feed that institution with vulnerable children. "How many children are there?" asked Maria, her voice almost inaudible. "Officially, 50. In reality, vans are arriving with children constantly, but no one sees them leaving." The silence that followed was charged with horror and understanding. They weren't just fighting for the life of one child. They were facing something much bigger and more sinister. "We need to act now," said Mr. Abernathy, his mind already formulating a plan. "If we wait for the system to correct itself, she'll be lost." "What are you suggesting?" asked Maria. "That we stop trying to work within a corrupted system, that we use all the resources I have, money, influence, contacts, to expose this operation publicly. But first, we need to make sure the girl is safe." It was then that Maria made her final decision. "I'm taking her out of the hospital tonight, no matter the legal consequences." "And where will you go?" he asked. "I have a place. People who owe me favors. It's not legal, but it's safe." The millionaire looked at that woman who had lost everything for her business decisions and was now willing to sacrifice her chance of legal redemption to protect her daughter. There was a courage in her that he recognized, the same courage that the girl had shown when she saved him on the road. "No," he said finally, "you're not running alone. We're going to do this right." "How?" "We'll expose everything publicly. Today. Use all the media attention this case has generated and turn the situation against them. But first," he paused, looking at the room where the girl slept. "First, we're going to make sure she wakes up tomorrow knowing she's protected." What none of them knew was that Dr. Silvera had already anticipated their attempts at resistance, and the plan he had devised to deal with any interference was crueler than any of them could imagine. At 3 in the morning, a discreet van arrived at the hospital with emergency transfer documents, approved by a judge who had been awakened specifically to sign the order. The girl would be removed not in the morning as planned, but immediately. And this time, There would be no opportunity for farewells or protests. The sound of urgent footsteps in the hospital hallway woke Mr. Abernathy at 4 in the morning. He had decided to sleep in a chair in the hallway near the girl's room when he was abruptly awakened by whispered voices and movement of equipment. His experience in business had taught him to recognize when something was wrong, and all his instincts were screaming alarm. Peering through the small window in the room door, he saw a scene that made his blood run cold. 3 people dressed in medical uniforms were preparing the girl for transport, moving with silent efficiency that suggested a planned operation. The child was unconscious, clearly sedated beyond the normal, and was being placed on a special stretcher with restraints. "What are you doing?" he asked, entering the room abruptly. The lead nurse, a robust woman with cold eyes, showed him official documents. "Emergency transfer authorized by the judge. The minor needs specialized care that this hospital cannot offer." "What specialized care? She was recovering well." "Sir, please do not interfere with official medical procedures," replied one of the technicians, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but following superior orders. The millionaire immediately realized that this was not a normal procedure. The girl was being removed in the middle of the night, without prior notification, with documentation that seemed to have been processed with impossible speed. It was an operation planned to avoid interference. "I want to speak with Dr. Martinez before you remove her," he demanded. "Dr. Martinez is not available," replied the nurse coldly. "And you have no legal authority to prevent this transfer." It was at that moment that Maria appeared in the door, clearly having been awakened by some maternal instinct. When she saw her daughter being prepared for removal, she let out a scream that echoed through the halls of the hospital. "No, you can't take her. I'm her mother." "Ma'am, please retire, or we will have to call security," threatened the lead nurse. But Maria did not back down. Instead, she positioned herself between the stretcher and the door, her arms outstretched as if she could physically prevent the removal of her daughter. "You'll have to go over me first." What followed was a chaotic scene that woke up half the floor. Hospital security guards were called. The girl began to wake up partially due to the noise, and other patients and relatives left their rooms to see what was happening. In the midst of all the confusion, someone had called the police. "Mom," murmured the girl, her voice slurred by sedation but laden with confusion and fear. "What's happening?" "I'm here, baby," replied Maria, forcing her way through security to get to the stretcher. "I'm not going to let them take you." But the lead nurse had produced a syringe and was approaching the girl with obvious intentions. "She needs additional sedation for transport." "What kind of sedation?" asked the millionaire, his experience in risk analysis in investments making him question everything. "Show me the medication." "Sir, you are not a doctor or legal relative. You have no right to this information." It was then that something unexpected happened. Dr. Martinez appeared in the hallway, clearly having been awakened at home and coming to the hospital urgently. His hair was disheveled, and he was still wearing casual clothes, but his expression was one of professional fury. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, automatically taking command of the situation. "Why is my patient being removed without my authorization?" "Doctor, we have higher orders," tried to explain the lead nurse, but he cut her off with an abrupt gesture. "Higher orders? I am the doctor responsible for this child. No one removes her without my medical approval." He quickly examined the transfer documents, and his expression became even darker. "This medication," he said, pointing to the syringe that the nurse was holding, "is not appropriate for a child in recovery. In fact, it is dangerous." "Dr. Martinez, please don't complicate the situation," said the nurse. But there was something in her voice that confirmed the millionaire's suspicions that this was not legitimate. "There is no situation to complicate," replied the doctor firmly. "This child is not leaving this hospital while she is under my medical care, and I want to know exactly who authorized this removal." It was at that moment that the police arrived, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of uniformed police officers, they were detectives in civilian clothes, accompanied by prosecutors who had clearly been called specifically for that situation. "I am Detective Silver," said the tallest man, showing his identification. "We are investigating irregularities at the institution where this child was being transferred. No one leaves this hospital until we clarify the situation." The lead nurse visibly paled. "I don't understand." "We have legal documentation." "Documentation that was obtained through pressure on a judge at 3 a.m, interrupted the detective. "The same judge who is now cooperating with our investigation into corruption in the child protection system." What was revealed in the following hours was a scheme that went far beyond what anyone had imagined. Dr. Silvera wasn't just abusive. He was part of a network profiting from the suffering of vulnerable children, receiving government payments for each child in their care, but providing minimal services while pocketing the difference. "The operation had been running for years," explained the detective during the subsequent interrogation. "Children were removed from families under questionable pretexts, kept in deplorable conditions, and when they asked too many questions or became problematic, they simply disappeared from the records." The Millionaire's former housekeeper had been a key player in the scheme, identifying wealthy families who could be blackmailed or publicly shamed, providing intimate information used to create scandals, justifying child removal. "She wasn't just trying to get revenge on you," the detective continued. "She was being paid to deliver the girl to the scheme. A child who had proven brave and intelligent would be valuable to them. They could use her example to show how they reformed problem children." Maria held her daughter's hand, who was finally awake and gradually understanding she was safe. "So all this was planned from the beginning?" "Not everything," replied Mr. Abernathy, a dark realization taking shape in his mind. "The kidnapping was real. Carlos Mendoza really wanted revenge against me. But someone seized the situation and turned it into an opportunity." "How so?" asked Dr. Martinez, who had stayed to ensure his patient was okay. "They knew I'd feel responsible for the girl. They knew I'd take her home, develop bonds with her. And then they'd use those bonds against me, creating a public scandal to justify her removal." The calculated cruelty of the plan was staggering. They had turned his compassion into a weapon against the very child he was trying to protect. "But their plan failed," the detective said with satisfaction, "because you fought, and because some good people in the system refused to be corrupted." In the hours that followed, more revelations came to light. Dr. Silvera was arrested along with several corrupt social services employees. The entire network began to crumble as more victims found courage to come forward. When the sun finally rose, the girl was safe in her hospital bed, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her. Maria held one of her hands, Mr. Abernathy held the other, and Dr. Martinez checked her vitals with the care of someone who saw each child as a treasure to be protected. "What happens now?" the girl asked, her voice still weak, but without the terror that had become so familiar. "Now," said Mr. Abernathy, looking at Maria with an expression that mixed relief and determination. "We're going home. Our home." "Our?" Maria asked, confused. "If you want to," he replied. "I have a house big enough for a family. And I think it's past time we set aside pride and prejudice to focus on what really matters." Maria looked at her daughter, who was smiling for the first time in weeks, and nodded through tears of relief. "I think she deserves to have a real family." But as they celebrated their victory, none of them realized the biggest revelation was yet to come, a discovery that would completely change the understanding of the entire situation and reveal connections that no one had suspected. The phone call that would change everything would come the next morning, bringing news about the past that would connect all the events in ways none of them could have imagined. The next morning brought a calm none of them had experienced in months. The girl was having breakfast at the hospital, surrounded by Maria and Mr. Abernathy, when Detective Silver appeared with an expression that mixed satisfaction and puzzlement. He carried a thick folder of documents that clearly contained important findings. "We found something you need to know," he said, sitting down at the small room table. "During the investigation of the corruption network, we discovered connections that go far beyond what we imagined." He opened the folder and pulled out a series of old photographs and documents that appeared to have been archived for years. "These are photos from when Maria worked at the company," he said, showing archive images of employees. Mr. Abernathy examined the photos with growing curiosity. He could see a younger Maria, smiling at the camera at company events, but there was something familiar about other people in the photographs he couldn't identify. "Recognize anyone?" the detective asked, pointing to a young man who appeared in several photos alongside Maria. The businessman looked more closely and felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. The man in the photo was Carlos Mendoza, not the embittered kidnapper who had tried to torture him, but a younger, smiling version, clearly in love with his co-worker. "Carlos and Maria used to work together," the detective continued. "And according to the records we found, they were more than just co-workers." Maria looked at the photographs with tears in her eyes, gently touching the image of the man who had been an important part of her life. "He was my boyfriend for almost 2 years, she admitted. "He was a good man, a hard worker. He dreamed of building a family." "What happened between you?" asked Mr. Abernathy, although a terrible part of his mind was already beginning to connect the dots. "When I found out I was pregnant, I told him first. He was ecstatic, started making plans for us to get married, to raise our baby together." Maria paused, her face twisting in pain. "But then you fired him." "I fired him because he was questioning company decisions," Mr. Abernathy defended, but his voice sounded weak even to himself. "He was questioning the unfair dismissals you were making to increase profits," Maria corrected, "including mine. He tried to protect me, and that's why you got rid of him first." The detective continued to reveal the timeline of events. "After being fired, Carlos became desperate. He couldn't find another job quickly because you had given him negative references to other companies. When Maria was also fired, he went into total despair." "He tried to find me," Maria said, her voice breaking. "He wanted us to run away together, to start a new life somewhere else. But I was scared, confused, and I didn't want him to sacrifice even more because of me." "So you broke up with him?" Mr. Abernathy said, understanding. "It was the stupidest decision of my life. I thought I was protecting him, but we only caused each other more pain." The detective took another document out of the folder. "Carlos tried to find Maria after he learned she had disappeared with the child. He searched for years, spent all his savings hiring investigators. When he finally gave up, bitterness had completely consumed the good man he was. The girl, who had listened to everything in silence, finally spoke. 'So the man who tried to hurt you is my father.'" The silence that followed was heavy and painful. It was a question none of the adults were prepared to answer in a way that didn't cause the child more trauma. "Biologically, yes," Maria replied carefully. "But the man who tried to hurt your foster father is not the same man who loved me and who would have loved you. Pain changed him." "Where is he now?" the girl asked. "In prison," the detective replied. "But there's something else you need to know. During the interrogation, when he learned that his daughter was alive and that she was the one who saved the man he blamed for destroying his life, he had a complete emotional breakdown." The detective paused, clearly struggling with how to present such sensitive information. "He's asking to see her, to apologize, to try to explain how he got to the point of becoming someone she had to save you from him." "Absolutely not," said Mr. Abernathy immediately. "She will not be exposed to more trauma." "I agree," added Maria. "She's been through enough suffering, But the girl, with the disturbing wisdom she had developed through her experiences, surprised everyone. "I want to see him," she said calmly. "Honey, you don't have to," Maria began. "I know I don't have to," the girl interrupted. "But I want to understand. I want to understand how someone who was supposed to love me turned into someone I had to protect you from him." 2 days later, a meeting was arranged at the prison where Carlos was being held. There were extraordinary security measures, psychologists present, discreet guards, and the guarantee that the girl could leave at any moment if she felt uncomfortable. When Carlos entered the visiting room, the contrast to the violent man who had kidnapped the millionaire was shocking. His eyes were red from crying, his movements were slow and defeated, and there was a fragility about him that was painful to witness. "My little girl," he whispered when he saw the girl, falling to his knees even in handcuffs. "My little girl." The child watched him with the same analytical intensity she had used to assess all other dangerous situations in her life. "You're my father," she said, not a question, but a factual statement. "I am," he replied, tears streaming down his face, "and I'm the worst father in the world, because when you needed me most, I was busy hating instead of looking for you." "Why did you try to hurt him?" she asked, pointing to Mr. Abernathy, who was present in the room. "Because I was a small, angry man who needed to blame someone for my failures. Because it was easier to hate him than to accept that I had lost you and your mother because of my own bad choices." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult anyone present had ever witnessed. Carlos explained how the loss of his job had triggered a spiral of depression and anger, how the loss of Maria and his daughter had destroyed his ability to think clearly, how he had spent years building a narrative where the millionaire was the villain, responsible for all his pain. "But you," he said to the girl, "you saved him. Even without knowing who he was, even without knowing that I was trying to hurt him, you chose to protect instead of destroy." "Why does that make you sad?" the girl asked, noticing his tears. "Because it shows me what kind of person you are, what kind of daughter I could have raised if I hadn't let anger consume me. You're brave and good, and it wasn't because of me." Mr. Abernathy watched the interaction with complex feelings. Part of him still felt anger for what Carlos had tried to do, but another part recognized a man who had been broken by circumstances and bad choices, and who was now facing the consequences of his actions. "I don't forgive you for what you tried to do," the girl said with brutal honesty, "but I understand why you were angry." "You don't need to forgive me," Carlos replied. "You just need to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become someone worthy of being your father, even if it's from afar." When the visit ended, the girl was quiet and thoughtful. During the way back, she finally spoke. "Now I understand why you feel bad for firing my mom," she said to Mr. Abernathy. "Because when you hurt one person, sometimes you end up hurting people you don't even know." It was an observation too profound for someone her age, but it perfectly captured the moral complexity of the situation they all found themselves in. That night, as the girls slept peacefully for the first time in months, Mr. Abernathy and Maria talked about the future. They had decided to raise the child together, not as a couple, but as a chosen family, united by their shared love for her. "Do you think we should allow Carlos to see her regularly when he gets out of prison?" Maria asked. "I think that should be her decision," replied the businessman. "She has demonstrated that she has enough wisdom to decide what is best for herself." But none of them imagined that the biggest surprise was yet to come. A discovery that would change not only their lives, but how they understood the entire journey that had led them there. 6 months had passed since the corruption network was dismantled, and life at the Abernathy mansion had found a rhythm none of them had experienced before. The girl had transformed into a truly happy child, dividing her time between playing with the millionaire's son, therapy sessions that helped her process her trauma, and precious moments rebuilding her relationship with Maria. Mr. Abernathy had made radical decisions about his businesses. Inspired by the journey of redemption his family had traveled, he created a compensation fund for all the families who had been harmed by his past business decisions. A significant portion of his fortune, including profits from stock investments and Bitcoin's applications, was allocated to support programs for children in vulnerable situations. Maria had settled into a wing of the mansion, taking on the role of the mother she should have always had, but also respecting the bonds her daughter had created with her foster family. It was a complex dynamic, but it worked because everyone put the child's well-being above their own egos. It was during this phase of apparent tranquility that the last secret emerged, brought by an accidental discovery that would change the understanding of the whole story. The girl was playing in the mansion's attic with the millionaire's son when they found an old box hidden behind furniture covered in sheets. It was a box that had belonged to the businessman's deceased wife, full of personal documents, photographs, and letters that he had never been able to review after her loss. "Dad, we found Mum's stuff," said the boy, running down the stairs with some papers in his hand. Mr. Abernathy felt his heart tighten. He had spent years avoiding dealing with his wife's belongings, the pain of the loss still too intense to face. But when he saw the documents his son was holding, something caught his eye. They were papers related to a charity project his wife had secretly developed before her departure, a project to help young, single mothers in vulnerable situations. And at the top of the list of beneficiaries was a name that made his blood run cold: Maria Santos. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice coming out more urgent than he intended. "In the big box upstairs," replied the girl. "There are many pictures of the pretty lady." With trembling hands, Mr. Abernathy went up to the attic and completely opened the box he had avoided for years. What he found inside revealed a truth that completely recontextualized everything that had happened. His wife had not only known Maria, she had been secretly trying to help her. There were documents showing that she had found out about the young mother's unfair dismissal and was organizing financial support for her. Unsent letters asking her husband to reconsider the dismissal. Detailed plans to create a support program that specifically included Maria and her daughter. The most devastating revelation was in a sealed letter addressed to Mr. Abernathy himself, written by his wife a few days before the accident that took her life. "My dear, if you are reading this, it is because something happened to me before I could talk to you about Maria Santos and her little daughter. I found out about her dismissal and how you were influenced by incorrect information. Maria is a good person who made the mistake of trusting someone who betrayed her. Her daughter is innocent and needs help. Please find a way to fix this. Don't let pride stop you from doing what is right. The love we feel for each other should extend to helping those in need." The businessman's hands trembled as he read and reread the letter. His wife had tried to protect Maria and the girl years before any of them had met. If she had lived long enough to send that letter, all the tragedy could have been avoided. Maria appeared in the attic, drawn by the noise and the devastated expression on Mr. Abernathy's face. "What happened?" she asked. Unable to speak, he simply handed her the letter. As Maria read, tears began to stream down her face. "She knew about us," she whispered. "She was trying to help us." "There's more," he said, showing her other documents. "She had discovered that you were fired because of false information provided by the housekeeper. The same housekeeper who later allied with the corrupt officials." The revelation painted an even more sinister picture of the conspiracy that had destroyed so many lives. The housekeeper had not only sabotaged Maria out of jealousy or greed, she had actively orchestrated the destruction of a family to protect her own position in the house. "Did she kill your wife?" Maria asked, her voice almost inaudible. "Not directly. But if my wife hadn't been emotionally distraught because of the situation with you, If she hadn't been driving on that terrible night to meet with Charities, the accident might never have happened. At that moment, the girl appeared in the attic, clearly realizing that something important was happening. "Why are you crying?" she asked. Mr. Abernathy knelt to be at her height. "We discovered that the wife I lost years ago was trying to help you and your mom. She was a very good person who wanted to protect you. Like the mom I never met?" asked the girl, referring to the deceased wife. "Exactly like her." The child processed this information with the seriousness she had developed to deal with complex revelations. "So she wanted you to take care of us?" "Yes," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. "She wanted me to do exactly what I ended up doing, protect you. Does that mean that when I saved you on the road, I was doing what she wanted me to do?" The question struck like a lightning bolt of illumination. For all those months, they had wondered about the girl's inexplicable courage, about the instinct that led her to protect a stranger. Now they had an answer that transcended logic and coincidence. "Maybe," he said softly. "Maybe you were guided by someone who wanted all the people she loved to be safe." In the weeks that followed, this revelation brought a peace none of them had expected to find. Mr. Abernathy was finally able to process the loss of his wife, understanding that taking care of Maria and the girl was a way to honor her memory and complete the work she had begun. Maria found forgiveness for herself, understanding that her journey through drugs and loss had not been just personal failure, but the result of deliberate manipulations by cruel people. She had been a victim as much as her daughter. The girl, in turn, developed a unique understanding of how all the people in her life were connected by invisible threads of love, loss, and redemption. She began to talk about having two mothers, the one who raised her and the one who had tried to protect her even before she was born. Carlos, still serving his sentence in prison, was granted permission for regular visits. During these meetings, he slowly began to rebuild a relationship with his daughter, not as the father he never managed to be, but as someone committed to supporting the family she had chosen. The housekeeper, confronted with evidence of her manipulation over decades, finally confessed the full scope of her actions. Her arrest brought closure to all the families who had been harmed by her schemes. A year after the discovery in the attic, the mansion had become a true home in ways that money could never have bought. The millionaire had learned that his greatest wealth was not in his financial applications or accumulated assets, but in the unconventional family that fate had brought together. The girl, now healthy and safe, still drew birds, but no longer birds trying to escape. She drew birds that flew in circles, always returning home, because she had finally learned that home wasn't a place you left, but people who would never abandon you. And on quiet nights, when the whole family gathered for dinner, there was an empty chair at the table, not out of sadness, but as a silent acknowledgement of the woman whose love had made it possible for them all to meet and save each other. The story that had begun with a hungry child saving a stranger on the road had become proof that sometimes the greatest riches are found not in what we accumulate, but in what we are willing to give each other. 2 years had passed since all the secrets were revealed, and the girl was about to turn 7. The transformation in her life had been so complete that sometimes it was hard to believe that radiant and confident child was the same one who had been found hungry and terrified on the road. Her hair now shone with health, her eyes had regained the innocence of childhood, and her smile lit up any room she entered. Mr. Abernathy had become a completely different version of himself. His businesses now operated with strict ethical principles, and a significant portion of his profits continued to be allocated to social programs. He had discovered that helping other families didn't diminish his wealth. In fact, it had multiplied his assets in ways he had never imagined possible, because investing in people turned out to be the most profitable business of all. Maria had blossomed as a mother and as a person. She had completed her education through night programs, landed a fulfilling job at an organization helping families in crisis, and developed a beautiful relationship with her daughter that compensated for all the lost years. She had learned to forgive herself for the mistakes of the past and focus on the future they were building together. On that special Saturday morning, the whole family was gathered in the Abernathy mansion kitchen, preparing a surprise that had been planned for weeks. It was the wedding anniversary of Mr. Abernathy's late wife, and they had decided to honor her memory in a special way. "Do you think she would be happy?" asked the girl, while helping decorate a cake they had made together. She had developed the habit of talking about her first mom as if she were a real presence in their lives. "I'm absolutely sure," replied Mr. Abernathy, watching his chosen family working in harmony. "She always dreamed of seeing this house full of love and laughter." The millionaire's son, now 6, had become the best brother any child could wish for. He had learned to share not only toys, but also attention and love, discovering that having a sister made his life infinitely richer. "Can I tell the secret now?" he asked, barely containing his excitement. "What secret?" asked the girl, curious. Mr. Abernathy and Maria exchanged knowing glances. They had made an important decision in recent weeks, a decision that would officially change the status of the family that was already real in their hearts. "Well," said the businessman, kneeling to be at the children's height, "Maria and I have talked a lot, and we decided that we want to make our family official in the eyes of the law." "How so?" asked the girl, although from the sparkle in her eyes, it was obvious she already suspected. "I'm going to officially adopt you," he explained, "and Maria will legally become part of our family too. Not through marriage, but as chosen family." The girl's reaction was an explosion of joy. She jumped into the arms of the man who had become her father in every way that mattered, laughing and crying at the same time. "Does that mean nobody can ever take me away from you again?" "Never again," promised Maria, hugging her daughter along with Mr. Abernathy. "Now we are a real family on paper too." At that moment, the doorbell rang. It was an unexpected but not unwanted visit. Carlos was at the door, accompanied by a parole officer. He had been released from prison the previous week after demonstrating exemplary rehabilitation and finding a job at an organization that helped former inmates reintegrate into society. "Can I come in?" he asked hesitantly, clearly nervous about how he would be received. "Of course," replied Mr. Abernathy, surprising even himself with the sincerity of the invitation. "Your family too." During the months of prison visits, something extraordinary had happened. Carlos had transformed from a man consumed by anger into a man dedicated to redemption. He worked tirelessly to become someone worthy of being in his daughter's life, even if it was only on the sidelines. "I brought something for you," he said to the girl, taking a small box out of his pocket. "I made it in the prison workshop." Inside the box was a small hand-carved wooden bird with open wings, as if it were flying, but perched on a solid base, symbolizing freedom with security. "It's beautiful," said the girl, examining every detail of the sculpture. "Can I keep it in my room?" "Of course you can," replied Carlos, his eyes filling with tears. "And whenever you look at it, remember that even when people do bad things, they can still learn to do good things." The afternoon passed magically, with the whole family gathered in the mansion gardens. The children played while the adults talked about plans for the future. Carlos had accepted a job in a nearby city, where he could start a new life, but still maintain regular contact with his daughter. "You don't have to stay away," said Mr. Abernathy in a private conversation with Carlos. "There's room here for you too if you want to be part of this family." "Thank you," replied Carlos, genuinely touched by the offer, "but I think I need to prove to myself that I can rebuild my life before accepting more help." Maybe in the future. As the sun began to set, they gathered in the garden around a tree they had planted on the first anniversary of the girl's arrival. It was a young but strong tree, growing rapidly and promising to provide shade for generations. "I want to say something," said the girl, standing on a small stool so everyone could see her. "When I was little and alone, I used to look at the stars and wish I had a family. But I never imagined I could have so many people who love me." She paused, looking at each face around her. "I have Mom Maria who made me, Dad who chose me, the brother who protects me, and Dad Carlos who is learning to love me the right way. And I also have the first mom who watches over us from heaven." The child's words brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. It was impossible not to be moved by the wisdom and generosity of heart she had developed despite all she had suffered. "And you know what else?" she continued. "I learned that family isn't about having the same blood. It's about choosing to love each other every day, even when it's hard." That night, after the children were asleep, Mr. Abernathy found himself in the office that had once been dedicated only to financial spreadsheets and investment reports. Now the walls were covered in children's drawings, family photos, and reminders of appointments that had to do with people, not money. Maria found him there, observing a photo of the whole family together during a recent picnic. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how I spent so much time accumulating riches that meant nothing," he replied. "Bitcoins, stocks, properties, investment funds, all that was just numbers on a screen. But this," he gestured to the photo, "this is real wealth." "You didn't lose anything by helping us," said Maria. "In fact, I think you gained much more than you gave." She was right. The businessman had discovered that generosity was the best investment he had ever made. Every dollar spent helping others returned, multiplied in the form of satisfaction, purpose, and love. 6 months later, the adoption papers were finalized in a ceremony at the courthouse that was more a celebration than a legal procedure. The girl was dressed in her best dress, holding the hands of her 2 fathers, while the judge formalized what was already real in their hearts. "Do you understand," said the judge, "that this adoption makes you a permanent and indissoluble family?" "Yes," the 3 responded in unison, and their voices carried the certainty of people who had found exactly where they belonged. When they left the courthouse, the girl stopped on the steps and looked up at the blue sky where some birds were flying freely in circles. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, as if she were talking to someone they couldn't see. "Who are you thanking?" asked Mr. Abernathy. "To everyone who helped us find each other," she replied simply. "Sometimes bad things happen so that good things can happen later." And as they walked together toward the car that would take them home, the man who had once measured success only in terms of net worth finally understood that he had discovered the only wealth that truly mattered, a family that chose to love him unconditionally, just as he chose to love them. The girl who had once saved his life on the road had saved much more than that. She had saved his soul, teaching him that the greatest fortune of all was to have people worth living for. And on that perfect afternoon, driving home with his complete family, the millionaire smiled, knowing that he had finally found the most valuable investment of his life, the unconditional love of a brave child who had transformed a stranger into a father, a house into a home, and an empty existence into a life full of meaning. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring everyday videos that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.